Online surveys that work. Today we're going to be talking about polls and surveys and how you can use these tools to get feedback from your customers to improve your marketing. My name is Lorraine Ball and I own a company called Roundpeg. We help small businesses use marketing tools to hit their goals, and hopefully you'll pick up some tips today that you can use to achieve yours. In today's program, we're going to talk a little bit about the what and why of polls and surveys. We're going to talk about structuring and planning questions because this is really the key to a great survey. We're going to talk about when and who you should be surveying, and also how to use the data and the results to follow up and change your marketing based on the feedback that you're getting, as well as give you some ideas on where you go from here. So let's start with the what and the why. Polls and surveys give you an opportunity to listen to your customers. You may think that you know everything you need to know about your marketing, but I got news for you. You don't. And so asking questions will give you some insight into what your customers are thinking. You might learn things about your customer service, about what it'll take to get people to recommend you to their friends, as well as where you need to be price-wise and how much more you can charge if you can improve the customer service experience. As you start your survey, you need to really start the process with an objective. What is it that you're trying to learn? What part of your marketing are you trying to improve? And what do you need to know to really use that as a foundation for action? I often tell people that they should not behave as if they're only going to have one chance to ever ask a question. And you really want to avoid asking questions all over the map on so many different topics, because then you really won't be acting on any of them. So pick one thing in your business that you want to focus on. Create a survey or a poll to gather data around that one idea. And then every question you ask should have a possible action associated with it. If people tell you they like this or they don't, you need to know, well, if they like it, we're going to do X, and if they don't like it, we're going to do Y. Otherwise, you end up asking questions and collecting data, and then there's no way to put an action plan behind them. So some things to think about in terms of setting your objectives. You don't want to go too broad. So find out if people read our Facebook posts as kind of broad. Instead, think narrow and actionable. Do fans prefer photos, links, or articles? And so now you've got very specific. It's not do people read the posts, but it's which posts are they reading and which ones do they really like? Do they like our product? Well, again, that's pretty broad. But do our t-shirts fit true to size? Do they run too small or too large? Now you've got information that you can act on. Did people like our event? Well, yeah, that's great, but it also doesn't really give you any insight into how you can improve the event next year. Asking questions like, how was the event venue? Was the program too short or too long or just right? Now you've got information that you can use to fine-tune next year. And that's what surveying and polls are really about, fine-tuning. Do you prefer a plated dinner over a buffet? You know, a lot of times organizations go to a lot of trouble to create an event, and they put a lot of effort into something that people don't really care about. So you want to match objectives and actions. So for example, if you want to know what type of content people want from the newsletter, that's the objective. What kind of content, and what are you going to do once you learn? Well, you better be prepared to refocus your newsletter to include that content. Will people respond better to articles, images, or video? Well, once you figure that out, now you need to start balancing your content to reflect audience preferences. Identify how often the audience wants to receive the newsletter. You take a survey and ask people how often they want to receive a newsletter, you better be prepared to adjust your sending frequency. As well as using research to figure out the day of the week that people want to receive information. We actually did a lot of research about 2 years ago and tested and asked people again when they were more likely to read, what they wanted, and we made a lot of changes in the kind of content that we sent and when we were sending it. We actually changed our delivery time based on what people told us, as well as looking at what their actual behavior. And that's one of the things that you really have to kind of keep in mind with a survey is people will answer in a way sometimes that they think you want to hear. So you always have to take the answers a little bit with a grain of salt and balance it against what you're actually seeing. So for example, here's a good way to kind of plan out a survey. Imagine that you want to improve your social media. You might say, well, I want to learn if my customers are using social media. This is a good poll question, but it's not good for a survey. Poll questions are usually 1 or 2 questions. Surveys allow you to go into a lot more detail. So how would you reword that objective to get a more fine-tuned answer? Identify how I could use social media to better engage my customers. So now it's not just are they using social media, but this objective, engagement is the objective. So now I'm looking at social media and I'm looking at engagement. Here's some sample questions. What platforms do you use? Well, that's a start, but a better, that's a start. And so now what do you do with that information? Well, if you find out that people in your audience are spending more time on Twitter and you're spending more time on Facebook, you need to refocus your strategy to get where your customers are. How often do you expect to see new content posted? Well, if people are telling you that they think you should be posting twice a day and you're posting once a week, there's a disconnect. Now, you may not be able to jump all the way to where they think you should be, but you certainly want to start planning on adjusting your schedule. What kind of content do you look for? This is really important. And it's also important to look at when you post these different things. How do people really react? Again, this is important to ask the question and then balance it against what actually is happening. All right, let's take another look at a different kind of scenario, and we'll look at some different objectives and questions. The objective, I want to know how to get more people to my event. Well, asking people just a broad-based question may not get you there, but focusing in on people who came this year and didn't show up, or people who came last year but didn't show up this year, now you need to figure out, okay, they used to come, what's changed, or maybe they registered and they didn't show up at all. And so now you can start asking questions like, are there areas that you would travel to attend an event? Would you be more likely to come if we did it this way or this way? You might also ask what kind of entertainment they're interested in. And again, start looking at local entertainment and talent based on their responses. I mean, it sounds silly, but if you simply ask people, now you save hours of arguing. I remember we were working on a retirement party for a very popular teacher. She had been at a school for 30 years, and everybody wanted to celebrate her retirement. And I remember sitting in those conference meetings as people argued about what kind of entertainment we should have and what we should serve, and we could have short-circuited that entire planning process if we had simply sent out a survey to the parents and the students and asked them what they thought, and then made decisions based on data and not the opinions of 2 or 3 people sitting around a table. There are different types of surveys. There are surveys that may contain multiple questions. They're great if you send them email or social media. They're helpful to get you feedback on a specific segment of your audience. They can be long, but they don't have to be. In contrast, polls are ideal for quick hits. I need to know one thing and I need to know it now. And so you can push it in email or you can just pop it into social media. Hey, do you like blue or green? We're thinking about changing our logo. Here are 2 pictures. Which one do you like better? They're not as scientific. Typically, you're not planning in advance who your audience is. So you're not necessarily getting a representative sample, but it's a good, quick feedback. And then the third kind of survey is really more designed to cultivate reviews, asking for feedback on a specific product or experience, and asking readers to rate your organization directly on a review site. This is a kind of survey. It is collecting data, but it is a little bit more niche than some of the other things we're talking about. And so one of the things that you really want to do as you're planning out your survey is to think about which of these tools you want to use. Do you need to do some sophisticated data analysis? Then you need a survey. If you're just looking for an impression, a poll will do. There are lots of reasons to do surveys. Maybe you want to know what your employees are thinking. Maybe you're trying to plan an event like that retirement party I just mentioned. Maybe you want to know what your customers think about your service. Maybe you're trying to identify potential customers. Figure out if your marketing messages are relevant for your audience and if customers are happy with the experiences they're getting. All of these are reasonable uses for surveys. But it is unreasonable to think that you can achieve all of these goals or even multiple goals with one survey. One of the things that we know, and we'll talk about this later, is the more questions you ask, the less likely you're going to be to get people to complete the survey. And so what you want to do is definitely narrow your focus, pick one topic, get great information, implement the changes, and then move on to the next. So let's take a closer look at questions. We know that as the number of questions go up, responses go down. So every question has to earn its way into your survey. There are 2 kinds of questions that you can have in a survey. You can have closed questions. These are multiple choice, yes, no, true, false. They're easy to answer. It's also easy to analyze if you're trying to look for trends in the data, if you're trying to measure opinions overall. Closed-end questions allow that scales are balanced and clear, and it really makes it easy for you to analyze your data. However, closed questions can tell you what, but they cannot tell you why. If you want to know why people feel a certain way, you have to do some open-ended questions. You have to give people an opportunity to simply tell you what they think when they are not limited by options, because sometimes you haven't given them any option that appeals to them. The problem with open-ended questions is they're harder to answer, and you start to run into respondent fatigue. So if you put too many open-ended questions in the survey, people just simply drop out. It's also harder to analyze and evaluate what the data means because you have to read all the responses, and there's no quick way to kind of tally them up. And it's harder to compare responses. But one or two open-ended questions to give you general comments is always helpful. So as you're putting your survey together, you want to have kind of a mixture. You want to have some multiple choice and a few open-ended questions, not too many. And you want to keep the survey fairly short. Some question tips, a few do nots and a few do. Leading questions. How would you rate the career of the legendary outfielder Joe DiMaggio? Well, you've already stacked the deck. You've already said he's a legendary outfielder. How do I come back and rate him a 1 or a 2? You have to ask a question that's just has no judgment built in. How would you rate Joe DiMaggio's career? Are you satisfied or very satisfied? Well, actually, I don't really like your product, but you're not giving me that choice. On a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you is a much better way. Again, you don't want to lead the audience down one path even when they don't really think that's the place they need to be. And too general, how would you improve our menu? Well, do you want me to tell you how to design it better? Do you want me to tell you what foods you should add? Do you want me to tell you to lower your prices? What should we add to our menu? What foods? And even more specifically, you might ask, what should we add to our breakfast menu? What appetizers should we add? Which items on the menu do you like best? And look for the ones that nobody mentions. That might be the one you could sacrifice. Few more questioned ideas. What do you think of the service? Open-ended question. You're going to get a lot of answers, but you may not be able to really use them. Instead, you found the service to be, and you can either give them 4 choices or give them a scale. Rate the food and the entertainment. Well, the food was a 1, but the entertainment was a 5, so I guess the event was a 3. Break it up. How do you rate the food? How do you rate the entertainment? How was the service? How was the room? Keep every element separate so you really know what people liked or didn't like. Oh, God, and avoid jargon and abbreviations. This is a real question that was sent out to measure the skill of a particular trainer, and it was, how did the RDD explain the use of CTAs to drive CTs? What they meant was, how did the regional development director explain the use of calls to action to drive click-through? The only person who understood this question was the person who wrote it. So, how effectively did the speaker explain calls to action? And then I would ask a second question specifically on the click-through portion of that. But did they explain calls to action? Do you feel after hearing the speaker that you're prepared to create your own call to action? So here's your question checklist, a few things to keep in mind. Number 1, make the first question easy to answer. You want to pull people into your survey, and you want them to go, oh, this isn't going to be so hard. You want to put the most important questions early in the process and ask demographic and profile questions last. And Explain to people why you need the demographic information. Keep it simple, don't get too personal, and don't make these questions mandatory. What you're looking for is the data. The demographics is helpful to segment, but if you only get a few responses, the demographic data isn't going to be helpful anyway. So keep it easy and not too invasive, and tell people why you're asking the question. All right, let's talk about your survey length. I'm going to give you the bottom line. The shorter you can make the survey, the better. So ask relevant questions. Ask questions that you really need answers to. Don't throw in questions that you're like, we're never going to use that data, but of course we have to ask it. No, you don't. And limit open-ended questions to 3 or less. Do not ask 2 questions if 1 is enough. This is a big surveys where you're paying people a lot of money to participate. You can play this game where you ask the same question in 2 different ways to look and make sure that they always answer it the same. But if you're doing a small survey of your customers to find out information, don't play games. Ask 1 question and try to keep the total number to 10 or 12 questions. We do an annual social media survey, and we've done it every year now since 2010. And the survey is 20 questions. And we tell people up front, there are only 20 questions. They're multiple choice that'll take you just about 5 minutes to finish. But we tried one year to go beyond 20, and our responses tanked. Don't ask too many open-ended questions. 2 or 3. Ask multiple choice. Take a look at the question and see if you can get away with 3 choices and an other. So if I really don't like any of your choices, I'll have an other and you give me a box. So you'll get the input if someone really wants to give it to you, but you won't slow everybody down by asking for it. And 5, and limit the number of demographic questions and target a 5-minute completion time. People will give you 5 minutes, but you start getting above that 5-minute range and your fall-off rate is going to be dramatic. Take the survey yourself before you send it. Open up the survey, push start on your timer, and take it and see how long it takes. If you can't fly through it in about 4 minutes, your survey is too long because you already know what all those questions mean. So go back, rewrite your descriptions, tighten it up, really take a hard look at every single question and give up 1 or 2 because you'll get more answers to your most important questions. So when do you survey? Well, there are lots of different ways to plan surveys. Number 1 is on the fly, is you need to know something. And this is where polls are great. We just wanted to know, we were thinking about changing our Monday morning resource kit, and so we put 1 poll question in the email. We got a bunch of answers, made the change, and moved on. You might also want to do surveys after an interaction, either after a proposal or after a sale or after you've actually delivered a service. And then you might want to have some surveys that you do on a regularly scheduled basis. We do an annual survey, as I said, on social media, and the purpose of that and the reason we do it at the same time every year is we're really looking to see what's changing. Segment and target your list. Just like any other kind of marketing, divide your community into your regular customers, seasonal customers, VIPs, and new customers. So now you've got groups. You can also divide people based on their interest. You can divide them based on interest around a particular product or service. But how this might work is like this. In January, you might send 1 long survey to everyone. And then in May and September, you might do shorter surveys to smaller groups or segments to really dive in and learn more about subsets of your customers. When you have your survey ready to go, if it's just surveying your customers, you can get away with sending via email. But if you're trying to reach a larger community and maybe tap into what other people, beyond people who are already doing business with you, are thinking, then you might want to reach out online, on social media, in email, maybe even a printed survey. And then you're going to hurry up and wait. After you distribute the survey, typically 50% of your responses, especially to a digital survey, arrive within 1 day. By a week, you have about 88% of all the responses that you're going to get. And in 2 weeks, you're pretty much done. You can keep the survey open, but it's really going to start to dribble after that. And for surveys for an engaged community, if you're sending it via email, it's reasonable to assume about 26% of your audience will respond. So then you've got to decide what happens next. After someone has taken your survey, where do you go from there? You might send respondents to a closing page where you can thank them, provide access to an incentive, or share information on when the results are going to be ready. When we send out our survey every year, anyone who takes the study gets a link to last year's results, as well as they get put on a list to get the new report when it's released. You can also send them to your website where they can maybe access an incentive, register for an event. So you need to think about, is this survey the end of the transaction, or do you really want it to be the first step in a longer conversation? Maybe they fill out a survey on their experience and you give them a coupon to come back and try some new product. But this next step is really an important part of closing the loop with your participants, especially if you want them to participate again sometime in the future. And your results should inspire action. You should review and, you want to review and analyze the data. You want to look for trends, create an action plan, follow up with people. Maybe there are things you don't understand and maybe you want to clarify that, and then maybe you want to survey again. But if the survey was long, if the follow-up was bad, people will be less likely to consider participating in your next study. As you're diving in and looking at the data, look for trends. Look for things that point either at where people are going to go in the future or how you might modify your responses over time. Segment your list. Pull different groups of people. If you have a group of people who really love your breakfast menu and a group of people who really love your lunch, send the breakfast people a coupon for breakfast and the lunch people for lunch. Look for the story in the data. You know, this is something that I'm kind of a numbers geek. And so I like to do surveys, look at the numbers, and then begin to make different charts and graphs until pictures emerge, until I see beyond just the numbers what's going on, and then create an action plan. A survey is actually a type of campaign. You're pushing questions at your audience, you're pulling insights, but really you want to close that loop by sharing the results. Let people know Maybe it's something as simple as, hey, you might have noticed a change in our Monday email, and now we're sharing this information because you guys told us that's what you wanted. We've added these new items to our menu, or we've changed our product based on your input. Thank you so much for sharing insight with us. Always, always, always say thank you. Create an action plan from the results. Maybe you're going to introduce new services, improve your website. Maybe you realize that your marketing communication needs to be streamlined and more relevant. Maybe you have realized that your customer base is a little stale and you need to put actions in place to attract new people, or you recognize that there's a subset of your target audience that really loves your stuff, and that's where you need to be focusing your attention. All right, so maybe you're thinking about doing a survey of your own. What should you be doing? Number one, use consistent branding. People need to know the survey is coming from you. Personalize it. Let people know that you're asking their opinion because their opinion counts. Let people know what it is you're trying to learn, that there's no ulterior motive. Let people know if there's an incentive. Everybody who finishes this gets a copy of the report. Everyone who completes the survey gets entered into a drawing for, or everybody gets a coupon. Why should I take 5 or 10 minutes to do your study? Let people know how long it's going to take. Make sure they know their responses are confidential. And clearly let people know what they're supposed to do next. Always include a closing date. You're going to run a survey. You're going to run it for X period of time. We know that your responses are going to taper off after 1 or 2 weeks. So close it and then start working on the report and using the data. You can collect data forever, but really, you're going to get the biggest bang by closing the survey, acting on the data, and maybe resurveying. Always include a thank you. And make people feel like they're a part of your organization. Your loyal customers really want to be on the team. So if you think you're going to do this, start with a single poll item on your website or social media and see what kind of response you get. Then move on and try 2 or 3 questions and send them via your email newsletter. Eventually you can build to different 10 or 12 questions and maybe use some different question types. Share the results with your respondents. Don't keep it a secret. And then send out smaller surveys to specific segments throughout the year. Make surveying and asking people's opinions a part of your ongoing marketing. If you have questions, now's a great time to go ahead and ask them or follow up with me after the program. Send me a note if you've got a question. I would love to hear from you.